driving around Kansas and living here my whole life, I've been to a lot of small towns, but nothing quite like Nicodemus.
Old western town, very small, very, very small.
There was a lot of cows, a lot of fields, but that's western Kansas.
It was like, oh, it's kind of bare. But you know, it's still bare. That's good because it still has a lot of potential to build something.
When I first heard about the project, I thought it would be a great experience just overall as a planner and as a student to get kind of more competition background but real world situations.
Because I'm an exchange student, I was looking forward to see how American system of national parks works.
I didn't really know much except from what our instructors told us that it was one of the lowest attended national parks, and so it's interesting to see how we could help boost attendance up, help kind of redesign the site while still keeping to its history.
I'd worked for the Park Service a couple summers, so I felt like I would have like a good perspective on it. But then learning about Nicodemus was something that I wasn't at all familiar with, even having grown up in Kansas. I never really looked into Nicodemus beyond hearing about it. And then working with planners and landscape architects, and then being one of the few architects, put me in a different situation than I'm used to.
So instead of just sitting there doing a lecture type thing, you're working on a project with other disciplines. We did a lot of things with the landscape architects, other planners, upperclassmen, and also just even around the university. There's a horticulture group that came and helped us, human studies came and helped us.
When we started this process, knowing that we wanted this interdisciplinary team, Josh and I looked at what kinds of students might be interested in a project like this. We looked at a good mix of landscape architects, planners, and architects. There were more than 41 students between them that participated in the core of the development of our project. But we also had students in journalism, we had students in human ecology working with family studies, we had students in the business school working with Don Martin, we had faculty in horticulture and agriculture and leadership studies and in community development working with us, and as well as interior architecture, providing lectures, dialogue, information to help the students in formulating the big ideas first that led us up to the mid-crit.
So we broke up into our groups for charrette. I had Eli, Will, Lauren Patterson, a few other people in my group, and basically we were instructed to do large overarching ideas for NPS as a whole, not directly tied to Nicodemus, but to try to sort of kickstart our brainstorming and get us into the semester and really start to expand our thought process. And I thought that was an interesting approach, and I liked the charrette that we did.
Well, the main thing that I remember from the charrette was just how crazy it was, especially because we had so many architects, and we were going for mainly for visitation. That was kind of our big thing, because we were thinking National Park Service, how do we get people in this small community? So we were going with really unique ideas of a large tower and everything. And I remember once we did go to the small community, they were like, we don't want to change very much. And it's like, well, those crazy ideas kind of got a little stumped, but you know, that's life. So it was a great experience to work with architects and landscape architects, get all those crazy ideas out there, but then kind of seeing the practicality of when people really want at the end of the day.
Without having been there, I found it really hard to kind of jump into the charrette. I'm used to site visits with every project, or at least going on Google Earth or something. And I'm, like as an architect, really concerned with the physical, formal nature of the project. And so that's kind of the direction that our charrette group took, to a point where I was almost hesitant that we were throwing out visions for what we ended up proposing was this kind of futuristic tower that had glass pods for you to sleep or camp and to participate in activities. And it was a really formal notion, and I contributed to that. But then we kind of took that and then stepped back from it and said, what are the principles here that are underlying it? What do we want for the community? And it came down to that idea of family.
I was curious to see what Nicodemus was actually like because I heard so many different things. I talked to people outside of class who've been in Nicodemus, but they went during homecoming, so they got a totally different experience. I just didn't know what to expect, so I was looking forward to the trip.
The drive out was pretty barren. I saw a lot more little towns than I thought I was going to.
So when I first got there, I was kind of wondering where the rest of it was. But at the same time, I started to take in the surrounding and the landscape, and part of the approach to the landscape through the Flint Hills Drive and that scenic route was really something that prepared you for the setting you were going to.
I'm a fifth-generation Kansan, and I felt that I knew a little bit about Nicodemus history already. But in traveling to Nicodemus with a Nicodemus descendant, Janella Holmes, my eyes were very much opened to what I didn't understand about Nicodemus. In that 4-hour trip between Manhattan and Nicodemus, Janella was able to point out to me all of the cultural landscape features along that trip, including the dugouts reinforced with limestone that the residents of Nicodemus would use as refuge during the era of the Sundowner laws. And so even on that trip, I felt that I had this first-person experience of what a living place Nicodemus is to the descendants and why that's so significant. So then entering Nicodemus that day, and this was a day that K-State students and faculty and many other people were being hosted by the Park Service and also by descendants of Nicodemus. What really struck me is that this was not a place that you can interpret as an empty ghost town or with empty buildings and empty fields. The significant parts of history that came alive for me that day had to do with the descendants talking not only about their own experiences there, but even doing living history, readers' theater, accounts of famous historical figures. It was so moving to me to realize that I didn't understand the deep significance of what Nicodemus meant to descendants all over the country, all over the nation, and probably beyond.
People that were living in brick homes that, yes, they were used as slave quarters at one time, but they had windows and doors and fireplaces and that sort of thing, and took people and brought them to Kansas where they were told it was the promised land, and they had to live in dugouts. A dugout is a hole in the ground, and they still stayed and they built this, built this town. And it still exists. We're not a Deerfield where there's just a couple of pieces or remnants of buildings. We're not a Dunlap, Kansas, where only the cemetery is still existing. You can go to any part of the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, and there are descendants from Nicodemus there. So that brings a very unique quality. And what we tried to express to this team was it's not about the place, it's not about those 5 buildings that have been declared a national site. It is about the families. That's what the K-State team really got, was that it's about those families and how do we sustain them.
Within it, there was all these kind of like archaeological finds in a way of, I assume, not too long ago, but you know, finding a spice rack with spices on it, or a chair that had, you know, the weather is beating on it, but there's all these signs of life that is now decaying. Right next to, you know, houses that are currently occupied by the residents still on site, but you know, not having a name to go with it really helped, or it prevented me from connecting with the place. But then we came upon this stash of books, and in each one there was cursive handwriting in pencil. It was starting to fade away, but it said property of Clementine Vaughn. And so I don't know who she is. I still don't know who she is. You know, I haven't pursued necessarily researching her, but talking to a few of the residents there, they said, oh yeah, she lived there back in the 80s or something like that, you know, 1950s through 1980s. And these are her things. And so it really helped me to connect and see the history, and the history that's still living, the history that's decaying, just really kind of connected me to the site.
I talked to one woman, she said like she moved around all over the country, but she decided to come back to Nicodemus because Nicodemus was her home. So it was really nice being able to talk to them and realize why they decided to come back. And through that, we could make our decisions on, well, how do we get other people to return?
This community wasn't just geographically based. It was more of a community in spirit, that the residents and the friends and the families, and they had a network of people all across the country, and we started kind of thinking about who we knew of and who we were aware of that were involved with Nicodemus. And we started thinking that outreach actually is all over the place. And we thought, okay, so these people share in the legacy of Nicodemus, and therefore they are part of the community because they are protecting and they are adding to the legacy. Maybe not in the place where the town is, but they are continuing the legacy. And I think that is one of the successes of Nicodemus, that this community has actually sent out evangelists. They've sent people out and filtered into the fabric of our country, and that's what makes them a community in spirit.
We put together just a few small tables, and we just sat around the table in kind of a round table fashion and had a chat about what they liked, disliked, wanted to see, didn't want to see, their hopes, their fears, their dreams, and their ideas and strategies that they had already started talking about. This isn't the first time, obviously, anyone started talking about how to make Nicodemus a better place, and it's certainly not a subject they hadn't already thought of extensively. So the idea was really just to listen, ask questions and listen.
It was really good because we learned firsthand what the community wanted, what they wanted to see their community become like, how they wanted to kind of blend modernity while adding their traditional aspects and still keep it a unique Nicodemus.
We visited with a number of the members of the community, and one of the people there was a 3 or 4 year old boy, and I asked him some questions, and he said, well, I'm awesome. And I thought that was really indicative of the community members of Nicodemus and how they instilled to their residents and visitors that everyone has importance and everyone is loved. And just thinking back of the African American heritage, where they may have come from locations where they did not feel important, I thought that was really significant, that this community of people really want to instill in their residents that they are important, and they really helped us visitors feel that we were important also.
The trip to Nicodemus, I think, was eye-opening, and I think it was something that I'll remember, obviously, probably the rest of my life.
ideas. To think of them is to think of what the community wanted. First was their input. Mark, of course, as the superintendent for the park, had some ideas as well. And then, of course, driven by the 7 principles that were given to us by the National Park Service in Van Allen to address. And then our own impressions of what we saw out there, what we felt out there, and then some resources that we had on campus who, along with the residents who were on our campus and near our campus, helped us to develop what we call the big ideas. The big ideas centered around some things that we thought the community really wanted. One was how we address homecoming, because that's an ongoing event that does bring people from all over the country to Nicodemus once a year. And then, of course, the culinary experience and looking at the fact that people used to come out there, including our governor, 20 years ago when Ernestine's was open as the only place to eat. And so we thought, how do we generate interest around food? Because Kansans love to eat and they will go anywhere where there is great food. We also had camps and festivals, and we already had an existing camp that Janella Holmes ran for kids in the summer. So how could we make our camps bigger? And then festivals. Festivals are really important because they respond to Nicodemus history. So we were interested in how to do that. And then technology, because technology is so important. We don't just have people come to the site, we also have people who would visit the site through virtual reality, through the internet, and through other ways.
I would describe our big ideas as not limiting ourselves too much. I mean, we wanted to focus on aspects of Nicodemus, big aspects from them, but taking it to the next level. Like, where can we go to make people come to this very small town that they can't find anywhere else?
I think a lot of the, before mid-crit was some big design concept ideas on the planning side, and the landscape architects did a lot more of what would the site kind of look like.
My impression from the mid-crit is that the visiting guests wanted to have us answer more general questions about reinventing the Park Service. So that renewed that thought in our minds here at K-State to think more about how can we improve the National Park Service.
Mid-crit was pretty intense, it was pretty long, but I think a lot of, it changed our direction a lot. We were going off in the direction of being very design oriented on where everything should go without understanding the whole history context behind it, but it kind of like switched us over after mid-crit to being what we are now. It was more of like a plan base of kind of the general concept of everything, how it works together, as opposed to just where the locations are on the site.
And we really tried to move forward with the traditions of mutual assistance with regard to the MPS structure. Seeing as how they were now part of the community, they're part of its history, part of its heritage, part of its story.
Right, basically the new concept is, there's two portions to it. The first portion is how the national park system should be restructured. Right now it is a very complex, tiring, really complicated process to get a park through the system. So we're restructuring it and basically taking out a few steps and making it simpler and easier for parks to go through, and the process goes a lot faster. It regulates money easier, and we also place a new park into the system. There's 3 different type of parks now. There's scenic, there's memory, and there's cultural. That one is split into 2 different sections. It is heritage, which is more of when it becomes considered a park, if there's people living on site or not, is like the main deciding factor. If people are not living on site, then it becomes a heritage park. The new one that we're coming up with is a protected village. This will be Nicodemus. Basically, the people that were historically significant are currently living on site, and they're having a say, and they're being really involved in the park.
So it gives you options. So we don't just tell you one specific thing that can be done on Nicodemus. Because of all these components and because of what Nicodemus is, it's really not possible to just have one set standard, one set design, or huge project. It's a place that needs to evolve before you could get to that point, or a place that needs to, it's always ever changing. And based on how it changes, we'll determine what can and cannot be done. And there's so many different options between all of the elements.
Things that we gained that from those master plans, like the idea of family and this history, this genealogical history and spreading out throughout the country that we had formalized, we were now being asked to take just for their own merit. Maybe they weren't so radically formalized on site, but let's talk about planning, let's talk about this community thriving with what it has, and what are the resources that we can add, what are things that we can strip away.
The students really learn partnerships and what it means to partner with each other and partner with other organizations, and essentially that means compromising. Every idea that was put out there was not accepted. There were some very good ideas that could not be executed. So I really feel that the students at the end of the semester did produce a very good design build model here that can be replicated in future parks.
The way that you guys have divided it out and will recognize the kind of park that Nicodemus is going to finally help the community, because the community also struggled. What do we do? How are we seen? What do we do? Because this is a living community and this is my home, so how do I fit in and also fit into the park category? Whereas what you guys did with the program, with the project rather, will answer those questions. It will give us a definite direction that is in connection with the Park Service. And so it's no longer just 2 entities, but it is the people and the importance of the community and its history, but the fact that it's a living entity, and the Park Service is part of us now. And so I think this project really answers that, and it gives us a better fit.
The partnership between Nicodemus National Historic Site and the university really offers some great opportunities, not only for the park to actually produce some wonderful documents that we can implement, but also just a great opportunity for the students to get involved in a real project, in a real place, working with real people.
Kids have great ideas and new and innovative ways of looking at things, and so it's just been a great experience. Looking forward to continuing to work with K-State and the National Park Service and the community to hopefully implement some of these ideas and concepts.